Okay, thank you very much for coming along to this exciting session as part of the Universally Manchester Festival. Thanks for everybody for coming along. I hope you spend a lot of enjoyable time on campus today. We've got today's talk here, but lots of different things going on around campus, and I'll explain a bit about that at the end. This is part of our 200th anniversary. It's our birthday. We were born in 1824 with the formation of the Manchester Mechanics Institute. So we've got 4 days of celebration. This is the third of those 4 days. So I'm Julian Skirm. I'm the university's Director of Social Responsibility, and I'm just going to pass over in a moment. But I just need to do a quick bit of housekeeping, because you may have noticed, if you've been opening your eyes on campus and you read the news, there's some ongoing protests and activity on campus in relation to the deeply distressing events that are happening in Israel and Palestine at the moment. And we have actually got an encampment. There's hundreds of these around the world at university campuses, and Manchester is no different. There's a very big encampment here today. We're not anticipating any disruption to today's event, but do be aware if we do have some disruption. We're quite used to this in the university. It's a place of free speech and exchange, respectful exchange of dialogue. So don't panic if people want to come in and address you as an audience. I will allow that because of our commitment to free speech, but we'll then attempt to progress with the event. So don't be alarmed if that happens, and we do have campus security around, etc. So just wanted to say that in case that does happen. So without further ado, let me hand over to a member of the In Place of War board, and who's going to be chairing the panel today, Kim Rowell. This talk is about 20 years of In Place of War, and a very good friend as well as colleague of mine, James Thompson, who will speak in a moment, is a very important person in all of this. This is it's an initiative we're so proud of at the University of Manchester. We spin out lots of ideas into society. And we often think of science and laboratories and when we think of spin-out activities, but we also spin out lots of charities. In fact, tomorrow, one of our spin-out activities, Manchester Histories, the festival, that is a spin-out activity of our history department. And In Place of War is a spin-out activity, a charity, if you like, which has become independent and has become something really big, which we're all so proud of at the university. So thanks for coming along. It's going to be a really exciting talk. Over to you, Kim, to introduce it all. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Julian. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you all for coming as we celebrate its 20 years of In Place of War, which seems crazy but also wonderful. I'm Kim. My day job is managing editor of news at ITN, but I am on the global advisory board for In Place of War, a role that I've had for about 4 or 5 years. But it is my pleasure today to moderate this brilliant panel, and we have some amazing people to introduce you to. First up, I have next to me James Thompson. In fact, as we've said, the university's own Professor James Thompson. You are founder of In Place of War and Professor of Applied Theatre here. Next to him, we have Ruth Daniel, who is the CEO and Artistic Director of In Place of War. Next to Ruth, we have Tongai Makua. He is a poet and co-founder and Senior Strategic Advisor of Zimbabwe. And then we have Salam Mangitsu. She's a comedian and chair of In Place of War's Youth Advisory Board. And at the end, we have Ed O'Brien, who is guitarist with rock superstars Radiohead and In Place of War ambassador. But before we get started with the questions, we're going to show you a show reel.
Please hear my people.
Hopefully.
In Place of War believes creativity catalyses change. We work in places impacted by conflict, social injustice, and the climate crisis, using the arts as a tool for positive transformation. Active in 30 countries, we empower grassroots change makers to transform cultures of violence and suffering into hope, opportunity, and freedom, amplifying marginalised voices.
What has happened today, it's amazing. It's beyond my expectation.
Working with communities affected by conflict, In Place of War co-creates solutions to make change using creativity.
Seeing hope coming to life through arts was beautiful and touching, yet very triggering.
The arts have their place in this world.
We got to Cheat Town, aka Cheat Tungwiza. Heart like Giza. Life is really difficult for local artists, but In Place of War, they came through, spreading a good vibe through the name of music.
We recognise that in order to create and make art in fragile environments, there needs to be safe spaces where that can happen.
Having a space where young people can go is key to their future.
We have a 20-year history of developing and nurturing creative spaces in some of the most challenging contexts in the world.
People have amazing ideas and they are young and vivacious. I think it's crucial to have such spaces.
We also focus on nurturing emerging young civic leaders through the arts. We champion social justice and the emancipation of those historically silenced by societal structures.
We are a growing movement of teenagers using their potential to create positive change in their communities.
Through residency programmes, In Place of War's Changemaker Network inspires young people to design and build better futures.
But there it is, In Place of War, we're like, blow, here you go.
Music is a universal language. It's a tool to connect. It's a tool to bring humanity all together.
Understanding the power of the arts to galvanise people and make change, our work has organically led to the development of a new area of focus around the climate crisis, using music to tell the story of climate change and inspire action.
I live a very comfortable life in a warm house, and I know all of this was brought here by misusing energy.
Each year, the impacts of climate change become more and more evident in the places that we work and for the communities already affected by conflict. We must act now, or it will be too late.
Whatever seed you sow today will determine the trees amongst which you, your grandchildren, and your future generations will walk under. And In Place of War has sown an amazing seed in this community.
In Place of War, creativity catalyses change.
Please hear my people.
I should also say that at the end of the session today, there will be an opportunity for questions, so please do think of them as we go along and feel free to put your hand up at the end. So to start with James, let's come to you. I know that in going back, and we were talking about the foundations and originations of In Place of War, in 1999, you were invited by UNICEF, weren't you, to Sri Lanka to take a look at what was going on there. You were then doing theatre training, that's right, isn't it? But it was more about the relationship between children and their suffering as a part of the conflicts that were going on in that country at the time. Can you tell us more about that and then how it inspired you to do what you're doing now?
Happy to, and thanks very much for the invitation. It's 20 years, obviously, In Place of War, and that makes me just feel a little bit old. But for me, actually, In Place of War, as Kim said, started 1999-2000, and I was invited to Sri Lanka. I was working at the time on using theatre for young people affected by violence. And I was invited by UNICEF to go and run some theatre training courses for people who worked with young people affected by the civil war in Sri Lanka, which was very acute at that time. Interestingly, I was working here, and I thought, well, I'm going to Sri Lanka, so I need to find out. I knew quite a lot about Sri Lankan politics and the war, but I knew very little about Sri Lankan theatre. And I went to the library behind us just here, and I looked up books on Sri Lankan theatre. And in that library then, there was one book on Sri Lankan theatre, and it was called Sri Lankan Theatre in Time of Terror by a woman called Ranjini Obasekara. And I obviously, being a diligent student before I went, I read through this book. And actually, it was a book about theatre in the southern part of Sri Lanka. And I was going to, I'm doing this because this is Sri Lanka, and I was going to the north, not the south. And there was a little paragraph in that book that said, because of the war, there's little or no art or theatre in the northern part of Sri Lanka. So because of the war, there's little or no art in northern Sri Lanka. And off I went. It's quite a long, difficult journey to get to the north. I start my first session, big room, 20 or 30 people sat in a circle. And the first thing you do when you're sat in a circle is say, can you just tell me who you are, introduce your names, what do you do? And I went round, and the first person goes, hello, I'm a theatre academic working in the theatre department in this city, and the bombs are going overhead. The next person goes, yes, I direct the big children's theatre network in this city. Next person says, yes, I run a street theatre organisation, and we're doing street theatre every day. The next person says, yeah, you get the picture. There was an extraordinary, diverse group of individuals creating art, working in theatre in that city, which was being affected terribly by armed violence at that time. So basically, this sort of, for me in my head, led to 2 questions and a hunch. The hunch was, oh, well, if there's loads of theatre and arts work happening in this war zone, I bet there is loads of theatre and arts work happening in multiple art war zones that we know very little about. And it's strange that these people are so isolated, they have no support, and they know very little about what's happening elsewhere. So that was the hunch. And the 2 questions were, in the middle of this armed conflict, why are people continuing to prioritize the making of art? What is it about this war zone that people say it's really important for us to continue to make art? And my second question was, why did academics think that they weren't? So there was a really important thing for me to say that the academics assumed that in a war, you don't make art. But here I was in this middle of this really intense war zone, and people were prioritizing making theatre, art, music, poetry. And in a sense, those things, the hunch and those 2 questions, are the germ, are the seed of In Place of War. We wanted to know, why did people continue to make art in war zones? But also, the hunch is, I bet, in every war zone that was happening at that time, there will be incredible artists that we need to learn from. And In Place of War grew out of that, the desire to give a platform to those artists, to say, share your work so that you can share it between other artists working in similar environments. And that was 2000. We then did a lot of work getting some money together, and 2004, the research project In Place of War was born. And we hired an administrator called Ruth Daniel, who's here, and she'll tell about that. And then, obviously, there was 10, 15 years of the research and the slowly morphing of this organization that was documenting, supporting artists in war zones into the organization it is today. Do you want to say, I will say sort of a couple of things about the outcome of the research, and then listen to these amazing people. Of course, when you document the work of artists in war zones, the first obvious thing is there is no one reason that people are making art in conflict zones. There are multiple reasons, and there are multiple different arts practices. And what we were interested in is giving a platform and a voice to those different practices. What we saw, for example, as one just example of this type of work, we saw work that was commemorative. It was about holding on to the memories of what was happening in people's lives. We've just seen the D-Day celebrations. That's a commemorative, often artistic practice. And there are many commemorative arts projects, both big scale, giving memory, giving a voice to really important things, and small scale, families, individuals trying to hold on to some of the stories of their lives. But we also saw the opposite in many war zones. It is projects that use the arts to actually forget what was happening in that situation. And it was really important to say that people also have a right to silence. They have a right to not be told that they have to remember what's going on, and they can use the arts to forget what was happening outside the walls in their towns and celebrate, enjoy themselves, because actually the arts provide that sort of sustenance to forgetting what's going on in the rest of the world. So we had all these sort of tensions between projects that allow people to remember things and projects that allow people to forget things, but also projects of social justice, projects around reconciliation, and a whole number of other issues. What's really important is that there was a range of work. So we saw work that was happening in wars, active war zones, at the time bombs are falling, where people were doing incredible work. Often, when the war was most acute, it was work to forget what was happening outside. Lots of work with children and young people was trying to give them a sense of their lives, their sense of humanity, whilst bombs are falling. But there are also projects that were about social justice and campaigning to stop the bombs falling. And obviously, some of these issues are really pertinent today. I can happily take questions about the rest of the history, but then it's morphed into the incredible project it is today, and Ruth has that story.
Thank you. And as you say, it's fascinating because the connection between art and war, you can relate it back as far as ancient Greeks and maybe even further. But Ruth, if we come to you, I know initially you ran international conferences in Manchester, Kosovo, the DRC, to give artists the opportunity to learn from each other. But as James was just saying, there's loads of different facets to it in the sense of justice, recognition, remembrance. And I know going back a decade or so, the vision was to create an online meeting place for artists to share their response to war, unrest and conflict. But can you tell us more about how you got involved, what the sentiment was behind it for you and how you are today?
So it's quite a strange story. So I was working at the uni doing an admin job and also running a record label at the same time. And I saw a job advertised. You know, you have a look online when you're just having your break. And I saw this job to work with James. And I just thought, this sounds amazing and fascinating and brilliant. And so I applied and I got the job. And interestingly, working for James part-time, but still running a record label, the work with the record label morphed into an alternative music industry event that started to take me also to places of conflict, gang-affected communities in Latin America. And so I was working with music and James with theatre. And obviously, working with James, kind of going to witness what art is used for, what art means in these different parts of the world, but also kind of seeing the same things echoed with music in other places. And so, obviously, working with James and the research, we were speaking to lots of what we now call change makers. So, remarkable people like Tongai, Salam, who are working in community settings and using the arts to make lasting change. And a lot of the change makers that we were encountering along the way were asking us, you know, can you help us, support us with certain things? A lot of the time it was to provide safe spaces for people to create art. It was about helping with capacity development for very grassroots organisations to increase their sustainability, to access funding, to access equipment and resources. And so quite informally, during the research, we were sort of helping to support people with things they needed. And this kind of grew and grew, and we realised that actually there's a network here of people all over the world, and the most important thing is for them to connect and share their practice, their ideas, their learnings between each other, and we can maybe facilitate that. So In Place of War kind of grew from the research into a network and then into a number of kind of pillars of work which look at helping support people with the development of creative spaces all over the world. It's around kind of creating entrepreneurial programs that help people improve livelihoods in communities all around the creative industries. And it's about providing platforms for people with marginalised voices to share their stories using arts and creativity to do that. And we've got performances later today by our amazing female group, Girl, performing in this very stage. So that's kind of how the research project kind of developed. It spun out of the university as a charity, and it now works beyond, I guess, places of conflict. So it also works with communities affected by climate change, which can quite often be the same communities. And it also works back here in the UK, and Salam can talk a bit more about the programme that she participated in a while. So what I find with In Place of War is I see it less as an organisation, and I go to a quote of James's, which is that art is not a thing, it's a process. And I think In Place of War is not an organisation, it's a journey. And it's been evolving and responding to what's been happening in the world for 20 years. And we listen to the people in the epicentre, the change makers around the world, and we help support them to increase their impact and to change the world, essentially, to make the changes that they want to see and to make a more just and right world. And I think that ethos has followed through the organisation, which makes it quite different. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And Tongai, as a change maker, that's a great title. But could you tell us more about the work that you do, because you run the Magamba network in Zimbabwe. Could you tell us about how the work that you do through that organisation has been involved with In Place of War and how In Place of War has supported what you do?
Okay, so the work that we do with Magamba, I'll have to paint a bit of like a backstory. Magamba came about, the backdrop is dictatorship in Zimbabwe, and a lot of propaganda and a polarized media space. And what we found was that there was a missing youth voice or youth narrative. And so me and my co-founder, we started this organization where we were looking at creating platforms online and offline where young people could express themselves, because it was a very repressive space, a space where information wasn't easily shared. So art became that vessel where you could communicate emotions, meaning, and participate in a more safer dynamic as to going straight into the streets, protesting, being arrested, and brutalized. So it started off just being like a poetry and hip-hop event, and we realized that young people express themselves in multiple different ways. And so we went into blogging, we went into utilizing comedy as a vehicle, like using satire to communicate our messages. And it grew to like a production house where we produce satirical productions. We now have a festival where we sort of like celebrate all the different elements of community events and engagements that we have. And in the spirit and nature of collaboration, we linked up with In Place of War, and it was like a brother or sister organization that had the same values and sort of like allowed for participation and breaking like a glass ceiling that we didn't realize we also had. So a lot of our artists would come through our programs, and then it's like, what's next? Like, how can we better impact our communities, or how can we better our own livelihoods? So In Place of War was that space where collaborations regionally could be achieved, and seeing young people excel beyond what we had expected them to excel to. So it was I don't even know how it began, or it was so seamless. Yeah. And yeah, I would say the main takeaway has been like the collaboration, the co-creation, and the networking. That's just been like, the knowledge share has been like the most important thing.
Yeah, on that just for a second. Because one of the most amazing things about the network is that I don't even know if you, Sam, who's Tongai's partner in Zimbabwe, was looking to create a space, and he was talking to me, and I showed Sam the space in Venezuela, Tuna El Fuerte, which is this amazing space that's created out of shipping containers, this huge kind of revolutionary art space right in the heart of Caracas. And you guys kind of, I guess, mirrored that in some way.
Yeah.
And created this amazing space called Motor Republic, which again was created out of shipping containers in a similar but different style. And I guess this learning, and this is what I think is really amazing across the network, is being inspired by how people are doing things in challenging contexts, I guess. And your space was, did the government not try to come demolish the space?
It's trimmed a bit off the top.
Right.
So it was a bit of a trimming. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's that, I think there's a collective energy that you find within a shared different conflicts, like places of different conflicts, sort of like have a shared camaraderie and a different approach at how they come about with their solutions. And it's always interesting when it's like, oh, I actually never thought of that. Like a solution can just be from a meeting with another individual, can be like a breakthrough that can be of a major scale for your own organization. So it's been a great learning.
And could you maybe talk a bit more about the impact of this on the community? Because I'm assuming that it's collaborative, as you say, and people are almost organically coming to the facilities that you're using. But how important is it for them to be empowered and have this outlet for everything that they're potentially going through on a cultural level?
I would say the spontaneous uptake has been like the most telling in terms of like, because so we have this program called Peace in the Hood, and what it is usually when festivals happen in Zimbabwe, which is like few and far between now, they happen in like the urban areas where people have financial access to said festivals. So with Shoko Festival, we like took that concept of festival and brought it into communities, made it a free festival, And then what that resulted in with the Peace in the Hood initiative is other communities starting up similar projects like that. Because the way that it comes about is all of the things that are necessary for the festival should be sourced from that community.
Yeah.
So we're not hiring the stage from Liverpool, we're not getting the sound guys from London and the performances from Ipswich. Everything is going to be like from the community that it's supposed to impact. We do bring in other individuals, but that's again to ensure that there is that knowledge and sharing of experiences. So there are like those little give and takes where it's like, okay, this external force also comes in to participate, but it's like, how can a community come together and reclaim space and create the environment that they want to live in?
I don't know what the music scene's like in Ipswich. I'm assuming it's relatively... Is it? There we are. Fantastic. Brilliant. Salam, if we come to you, because you were involved in the first 100 Agents of Change programme that In Place of War ran, it'd be great to hear more about that and how it's influenced you and your career and where you are right now.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Salam. I joined 100 Agents of Change as part of one of the partnering organisations, Counterpoint Arts. I was on a programme there doing stand-up comedy, so people from migrants and refugee backgrounds. So I came across this ad. I don't know how exactly, but it was like, it's a programme that will help you kind of develop. It was middle of lockdown period as well. It just so happened that two of my friends were community outreach managers for it. It wasn't nepotism, it was just pure coincidence. So I was really happy to get the chance. So I joined, and then quite instantly I realized, okay, so we're kind of creating the program as well. So it's not, we have a say in what it is that we want as young people, 100 of us all over the country, online. So it was really like, we felt heard. We got to co-create a contract of care and design a duty of care, kind of like things that we would need, well-being, we all kind of different, I guess, mental health, all of that was included, which was really nice. And then as part of it, we got to apply for seed funding, which I did not get, but I'm fine. It's taken me years to get to it. But I did get access to like a mentor who happened to also be based in Manchester, I think. She was a senior producer at Women of the World Festival, which is huge for me considering I'm like a community organizer. So to be able to get access to someone like that who looked over my funding application, I've had so many failed funding applications, but she shared some of her, I don't know if she's allowed to do that, but she shared that for me. It was really amazing. Yeah, I don't know if I answered that question.
Yeah, no, great. And also you're now chair of the Youth Advisory Board, aren't you? So how's that been? What
Let's use the term youth is loose, yeah.
Go with it.
They've been very generous as to like increasing the age, so it's up to 35 now. Yeah, so as part of this, I've kind of got the chance to go with Roz to speaking engagements about what it is that we do, what we want to do. Learning from Ruth as well has been really impactful. Yeah, so networking has been a big part of it, and now I guess I want to take myself to the next level and I've agreed to be the chair of the Youth Advisor. It's also very cool to like meet quite famous people, like sitting next to Ed O'Brien from Radiohead. In what world does that happen?
Brings me nicely. Hi, Ed.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for being here. And as an artist and as an ambassador for In Place of War, what has it been like for you, and why is it important for you to do this kind of work?
I think because what I've realized, I've been a musician now for 30-odd years. I'm more aware now than ever about the healing aspect of music. And the way that music heals the musician, but it also has the power to be part of an environment, a place that helps the healing. And I think the key to a beautiful future to our world is we need to heal. I mean, everybody needs to heal, you know, and I think that, so full disclosure, about 3 years ago, James contacted me. James and I, way back in the 80s, were at a school in Oxfordshire. And he was 2 years above me. I don't want to embarrass you, James, but James emailed me about, and I saw a professor Manchester University, which I was a student here too. And I remember James, he was 2 years above me. He was one of the cool kids, but he was very cool. But he was funny and he was kind, like a lot of the other cool kids weren't. And I would just remember him having tremendous integrity and just being a really lovely guy. So we met up and he started to talk to me about In Place of War. And, you know, I really haven't done much. But the thing that I've loved about my involvement so far is obviously what it does. Yeah. But what you're also looking, when you align yourself with organizations, you're looking for, what is it? I guess it's a spirit and it's an integrity. And what I've loved about it is that it's small. It seems to be, you know, Ruth was telling me, there was a presentation during COVID about this beautiful scenario whereby you've got the network and you're all Zooming together. And it's in South Africa, they're trying to set up a bakery.
Yeah, it was in Colombia.
In Colombia.
The guys were setting up a community kitchen during COVID, so it was a bunch of hip-hop artists who realised that people couldn't go to work, so they couldn't afford food. So they decided to set up a community kitchen. But the guys in South Africa had already done this, and they were serving like thousands of meals every week. So we brought everybody together on the Zoom, we put some translators in, and they just shared what they knew, what they were doing, how to make the most of ingredients. And within a week, the guys in Colombia had got a space, they'd hustled for loads of equipment, and they were now serving meals to people from the community. And that space exists today. They're still continuing, but they also have it as an education space, an arts centre. So it grew from this connection.
Yeah, so what I loved about what you were doing was, a lot of organizations, and there's a tradition, I'm from Oxford, and Oxfam is this huge, big, but one of the complaints is that they go into countries and they say, this is what you need. And what I love about In Place of War is they listen, they go, what do you need? And your story when you were telling me was this, I want to be involved with something like where you listen to what people need and how can we enable that? Yeah. So that's why I'm right at the start of my journey with In Place of War. Yeah. But I was immediately felt, you know, completely aligned with what's going on.
And to build on that point as well, I was fortunate enough to go with In Place of War to Greenland recently, and we met with an Indigenous artist who I know that you've met too, Nuka Alice. Yeah. And when we interviewed her, she said there was this weird dichotomy she had because she needed fuel for her car, she needed the connectivity, she needed to get on the internet to be able to share her voice and her music with the world. As an artist, do you have similar kind of considerations? How do you deal with that duality?
I mean, you know, touring. You know, in Radiohead, we've wrestled with the whole idea of touring. You know, we did an audit back in 2008 because we knew, you know, you this big kind of, you're like this big court that goes around, and so yeah, you're wrestling with it constantly, and it's the balance is. I mean, the balance is, you know, hopefully what you're doing and what Nuka's doing is the you're bringing light, or you're helping, you know, for a night you're bringing light to you're moving people. So you sort of you kind of try and quantify that against your carbon emissions. You know, we're not advanced enough as a species to measure what art and creativity does. We can't put it in a profit and loss or a balance sheet, but we can do the carbon. So we're trying to work out all the time what's the best thing to do. So yeah, you have to be. But the good thing is there are a lot. I mean, you know, there are a lot of artists who, you know, Billie Eilish is a great example of that. There's a lot. It's interesting. I think 10 years ago, this wouldn't have. It was bubbling under, and certain artists like ourselves, but now it seems to be at the forefront of so many artists' agendas and how they can tour. So yeah, it's for obvious reasons.
And to build on that, maybe a question for Ruth and Tongai, actually. If you're factoring in this brilliant relationship that In Place of War has with grassroots communities, and how you, like Ed was saying, you're not telling them you need to do this. You're trying to work with them to enable them and empower them and give them the tools to help themselves. How fundamental is that? And moving forwards, how intrinsic is it to what you're trying to achieve?
I think the beautiful thing about communities is if you try and impose something, they'll just reject it. It'll just be rejected. Like if you try and drill a borehole in a place where they want the internet, for example, like it'll be like, well, it's good, but who is it serving? So, I mean, at the core of it, listening, I think as an artist, you have to be observant of your surroundings, read the room, and sort of like then paint from that blank canvas or what you're getting from the different spaces. But yeah, it goes back to that element of collaboration. Like we'll come and not impose, but be more like, how can we learn from each other? Not necessarily like how can we help you? Because for instance, like when we have our festivals, like artists will come up and be like, wow, thanks for the opportunity. And we're like, well, the speakers don't sing. Like the mics don't produce anything without the being that has to actually be the creative at the center of it. So the mechanics of it can be separated to say, yeah, we're bringing this stuff in, but at the center of it should be what you want to focus on. So just realizing what's the most important element in it, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think for us as an organisation, I think, learning from James, really, for myself, I think it's really key to listen. And we work with local organisations. We don't have an office in Zimbabwe. We don't have an office in Brazil. We work with local grassroots organisations who already have the buy-in from the community. They know the nuances of working in those communities, and they know how to make lasting impact. And so for us, generally the way it works is we only go places that we're invited to. People maybe say this would be interesting to make this connection through the network. We go. And generally, we go with a group of our change makers, so it's not just me going. And we listen, and we talk, and we understand the limitations of what we can do, and we're very clear about what we can and can't do, and that everything is co-created, and understanding that we can't necessarily always leverage the funding, so we're very honest with communities, and build these lasting relationships. So generally, we start off quite small in terms of how we work, and then we kind of build and build and build, so to a point where maybe we're creating a physical space. And I think just to also add, it's really important for us to recognise our position as, for me, maybe a working middle-class white woman from Manchester, and that, really it's not about my voice. I see myself as a hustler. I see myself as someone who just does what I can to try and make things happen, sometimes against all odds. And I think for me, just to kind of say, again, to sort of thank Kim in this respect, around In Place of War, particularly during and post-pandemic, we've created groups around us that help hold us accountable for what we do. We have a youth advisory board, we have a climate advisory board, we have an artist advisory board, and we have a global music industry advisory board, and our boards of trustees. So we're really, all the time we want to be accountable. We want to reduce our carbon footprint as much as we can. We want to make really lasting and meaningful impacts that really matters at the community level. So we're very, very aware of ourselves in this and constantly question our role within all of that, which is complex, but yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm really keen to open up for questions, so please have them ready. But before I do, I wanted to just acknowledge the current context that we're in, and I know that In Place of War, you're in touch with changemakers in Palestine, and there's many other massive global acts of terror and conflict happening right now. And I know it's difficult sometimes to have the right words to comment, but I was wondering if I could ask each of you maybe just to give a little bit of a reference to why you feel, in particular, the work of In Place of War is so important right now in that kind of context. James, we'll start with you. Nice, easy question.
Well, thanks for that.
Yeah.
It's very... obviously, In Place of War has worked in the part of the world that is facing the terrible situation at the moment. And so I know Ruth and colleagues can speak about that more actively. As part of In Place of War, as an original project, one of my colleagues was in Gaza, working with theatre companies in Gaza, and also working with theatres on the West Bank. And there's one called Jenin People's Theatre, which has now been almost completely destroyed. So, and at the same time, I get WhatsApp messages from a colleague of mine in Israel whose daughter has been put in prison for refusing to fight in the IDF, in the Israeli Defense Forces. So we have complex long-term relations with people across Israel and Palestine, and the situation at the moment is utterly devastating to those people. We can hopefully maybe platform some of the voices of people working towards a better Middle East and a better Palestine and Israel. And we have to accept that it's a very, very contentious issue, which we are only hardly powerful enough to say very much, but it's acutely part of all our thinking at the moment.
Thank you.
I think just to add to that, I've been to Palestine 5 times with the work of In Place of War, working with local grassroots organisations. We helped to co-create a music industry event in Palestine called Palestine Music Expo. And we've worked with some of our creative entrepreneurship programs in Palestine, and also mobilised a lot of music equipment out there. So I've been out, and I've kind of, for me, it's an incredibly complicated situation. But I wanted to quote one of the people that we work with, a guy called Abdel Fattah, and he's from an organisation called Al Rawad, and he talks about the work of the arts and the role of the arts as a beautiful resistance. It's about using the arts to create opportunities for people to question what's happening, to use the arts to give people hope, use the arts to give young children the opportunity to forget about the conflicts around them. So for me, the arts is really powerful, and I think also personally, my perspective is that dialogue's really powerful, and the arts can create spaces for dialogue to happen. So that would be my perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to kind of put it all together when we speak about places in current conflict. I don't.
As a way of expression, though, potentially, a way of, the arts as a coping mechanism, or a way of what we were talking about earlier about joining communities and allowing that kind of family.
Yeah, it's like it kind of comes back to sort of like how I started with comedy and satire, was because I found that the work that I was doing, focusing on a lot of conflict, the work I was doing was depressing, and I became depressed, and there's always like this air of hopelessness. So I feel like every day is like kind of like trying to fight off that feeling of hopelessness, but at the same time feeling the guilt of you're not actually in the war to feel hopeless. You're in a space where you're able to influence some form of change, however minute that might be. So it's always trying to battle and balance out those emotions. Yeah. But art definitely plays a part in not always escaping your reality, but also painting another person's reality so that it can be reflected more on the mentals of others, and more change can sort of like take place.
And Salam, I suppose when you're working with the Youth Advisory Board, how much is this a component of what you're addressing? Because I suppose there's a lot of like soft infrastructure as well. It's not just the buildings that are gone. There's like paperwork and identity documents and things like that. So is there a way that you can, again, collaborate with the board that you're with and discuss these things and amplify what it is that you think needs to change?
We haven't done that just yet. We haven't got that far yet. But in terms of like Palestine and things, we've felt very safe to say, okay, this Instagram post, if it's coming across partial, could we maybe change the language? These things, I think they do add up and they do make a difference. We've seen in Manchester as well the power of social media. You know, one at home, for example, the gallery artists protesting to make change happen. So for me, I'm a comedian, but I'm not quite talented enough to talk about that in that space because it's not funny at all. So I just protest as much as I can. To no answer.
I suppose, Ed, again, building on that, you have a prominence and you're a figure, you're a popular figure. Do you ever feel like a responsibility, and how do you manage that?
It's really interesting. I've been really, really, really wrestling with this at the moment. Up until October the 7th, I've sort of had an Instagram that what I've liked about it is the communication, and I've loved the two-way thing. And I've been getting a bit of flack recently because I haven't been on my Instagram. I haven't wanted to. I think so many of us, it's like I've really struggled with how can, with the horror that's going on over there, how can I be showing somebody my new guitar? I just feel I can't do that. Sorry, I'm going to swear, but what the fuck is that? So someone had a go at me and said, oh, you should be, you've let me down. I thought you were a good guy. You haven't posted. You haven't said Free Palestine. I put one post I did do. I said, ceasefire now, and bring the hostages back. But I realized that I needed time, like we all need time to how do we feel this? How do we process this, even from afar? And we're not there. And what I realized was I do not want to reduce something so horrific and so deep and multi-dimensional to some soundbite, or that's, I'm not having to go anyone who wants to do that, but that's not, I can't do that, or a post on Instagram. So someone said, someone reported about, but your voice is worth 1,000 voices. I don't believe that. When you introduced me from this superstar rock band, I'm like slightly cringing, but I know it's the kind of, because that's just what I do. I'm a musician. I don't see myself as having a more valid. I'm just one voice amongst many. So I haven't worked it out yet, to be honest. I just feel like you have to follow your intuition, what feels right at the time. And of course, there are always going to be people who say you're not doing the right thing, and you have to accept that. And sometimes sometimes you're not doing the right thing. So yeah, I don't know if there's an answer there. But.
No, you're right. There's an awful lot of nuance. It's not black and white. So, okay, your turn. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like? There's a mic.
Hi. Are we on? Question for Ed. The carbon audit you did in 2008, is that an ongoing process? And what was the result of that audit?
So the interesting result for that was, and it is an ongoing process, so last couple of years, there's an organization called Reverb in America who got involved with on a personal level. What was interesting is about when they did the audit, the assumption is that, with a band like us, so we're probably playing, it's a lot of people every night, it's between 14 to 30,000, and primarily in America. And the assumption is that, you've got band and crew, probably numbers 50, you've probably got 12 trucks, you've got 8 buses or whatever. The assumption is this is the big, and what was so interesting was that when you did the eco audit, the biggest carbon footprint is from the audience. So that was the bizarre thing. And what we'd always done before that, because we didn't like playing in arenas, we were always seeking out places of beauty outside. They are the worst places to play because there's no infrastructure. So that when we toured in 2009, we hadn't toured in arenas for, 15 years. And we went into arenas, big cities, transport hubs, and that was that. But it's an ongoing thing, and there's lots of, it's just one of those things. Yeah.
It's also the payoff, isn't it, between, I'm not allowed to mention Taylor Swift, but when she is obviously on tour right now, but the economic impact she has of literally just being in this country for 8 dates is actually so incremental. It factors the GDP by 10 points or something. It's a little bit crazy. So is it, again, that kind of dichotomy of like, you want to, perform for your fans.
Yeah, well, I think Radiohead economics don't compare with Swiftian economics. But I think the thing for me is that you realize is that what you're trying to create as a musician And I think this is with art. What you're, and great theatre and humour is you're trying to, the moments are the transcendent moments. That's what we are all, that's why we go and seek art. It's those moments that are transcendent, which are connect you with everyone else, connect you with the universe, with the divine, whatever it is. And that is, I don't know how you quantify that, but I feel that that's really important. We got a lot of stick, quite rightly, I think, you know, when we went and played in Israel in 2018. And what we always said was that our experience of playing in Israel then, I don't know if it is now, but 50% of the people that we, and certainly our people, our tribe, were two-state solution peace people, and that's our experience always going there. So we were going like, I know BDS is saying, we're not disagreeing with your assessment of the nature of Israel and the nature of the occupation and how brutal it is. We just think that maybe our response, if we can go there and do one night and play for one night for these people and maybe help uplift them or create a transcendent moment, these are important for them to feed them because they're involved in a struggle. So that's what, that as a musician, and I think that's one of the things we have to be careful of, but I think that also we shouldn't be scared in treading in these places, you know.
Absolutely. Ruth, did you want to speak more to the carbon literacy program and the training that In Place of War actually undertaken to, you know, associate with some of the big projects that are coming up?
So we have a big new strand of work in Place of War called Earth Sonic, which is all about using music to tell the story of climate change and to engage young people in action all over the world. And to do that, we're working on some incredibly brilliant and creative projects with some incredible artists. We're working with a UK electronic band called Bicep. They've collaborated with 7 incredible Indigenous Arctic artists to create new music, which is then going to be broadcast all over the world. As part of this project, we're very aware of the idea is to inspire people to take action and also to give them the tools to kind of help to advocate for systemic change. But also we're very aware that this project needs to have the most minimal carbon footprint it has. So we've commissioned a piece of research to look at the impact of the recorded music industry in terms of carbon footprint. And are starting to work, we've set up our own record label, which we want it to be completely carbon neutral, and to look at the sort of supply chain in terms of digital distribution to see how we can minimise that by using server farms in places like Iceland that are powered by the geothermal. But also working with vinyl, we want to make records. So we're working with a new vinyl manufacturing company that makes vinyl from sugar beets, so plant-based vinyl that we can then distribute, and looking at localized production and distribution, again, to minimize the carbon footprint. And in Place of War, as part of this process, we all embarked on carbon literacy training, which I recommend anybody in this room to do. It's fascinating and brilliant, and you learn so much. And for me, in this training, I'm now pretty much vegetarian now, which is a big move for me. I think about the way I travel and use slow travel as much as I can. So really, this training helps you understand how you can kind of actively make personal changes, which is great. But also, we've created a environmental policy within In Place of War, where we will measure the whole of the carbon footprint for everything that we do, projects, events, and we will look at ways that we can minimise that over the next few years. We've also got an environmental champion, an amazing woman called Claire O'Neill, who's from an organisation called A Greener Future, to hold us accountable. And I think that's it, isn't it? It's about, the science is not lying. I've been to places, I've seen, the glaciers are receding, and this is not long. We don't have long to make changes that can really protect the humanity for the future. So I think it's really important for us to do this and it's about holding ourselves accountable all the time and to make the changes we can in our lives. So that's been really powerful over the past couple of years.
Thank you. More questions? The lady been very patiently waiting, sorry. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Tonga, I'm very interested in you saying, oh yeah, they took the top off it. It's a very nice, sanitised sort of conversation we've had. It doesn't feel like that to me at all. It's like still water on the top, deep currents underneath. And so we've had a nice, civilised conversation that we could have had over the dinner table. And I've got this feeling, but in Hong Kong, you started stuff, the students uprose, and then they were suddenly all picked off. They disappeared. The top was taken off. I don't know whether a load of people were exterminated when you said the top was taken off.
Oh no, so this was like just adding to what Ruth was talking about with regards to our shipping containers. So like the actual design was like 2 shipping containers, 2 40-foot shipping containers on stilts, and then on top of them was another shipping container that was like a rooftop garden and a rooftop bar. So the local council came and they basically told us they were going to demolish the entire structure, even though it was a legal structure. They had all the paperwork that we had filed for it, but it was like a political play. So in the end, they enacted, like they brought up the Peeping Tom Act from, I want to say 1890 something.
You had watchtowers that you were viewing everybody from.
Yeah, so we're basically told that we need to chop off the top of the, because they were basically going to lose the case. So they wanted to save face. So they were like, okay, we'll come to an agreement. You remove the top of the shipping container. So now we have the other container at the back of the offices as a ground bar. And now we don't have like a rooftop garden and stuff. But yeah, it was like part of like the annual pushback that we'd get from the government. So I guess I say it so lightly because that's how you have to like cope with the constant attacks. At least in that scenario, there weren't any arrests or abductions. So it was one of the lighter moments where we were just like, well, they helped us redesign the space. Yeah.
One of the things that I remember from that as well is when we got the call from the guys at Magamba, and there was a hashtag like Save Moto Republic. And one of the nice things about In Place of War and the network is that we were able then to activate the network. So you all of a sudden had these posts all over the world from people saying Save Moto Republic. And I think that's one of the valuable things in Place of War is it's about the international kind of strength and solidarity within the community to say, actually, we're not just individual organizations doing this, we can all kind of like share messaging and protect each other through the network, particularly internationally if something happens at a localized level. So that was a good example of everybody activating around that amazing space.
It's funny because we had like an in-house joke where we'd say the foot traffic at Motor Republic was fair before that. And we always used to say, like, who would have known that the government would have been the catalyst to kick off like our marketing campaign to make it a more popular hub than it was. Like, but not so much, but yeah.
Thank you for that. Any more? Yep.
First of all, thank you very much. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I've personally learnt a lot. My own experience is in Eastern Europe and the Far East, which you've not really covered. And in both these regions, you have, I'm not going to dignify them with the name governments, rulers who glorify war and glorify racist nationalism and have an ubiquitous secret police. Would you be able to operate in such societies, or are there, unfortunately, still no-go areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible to support people generally anywhere, but how that happens varies on the context and the kind of, I guess, the uniqueness of each situation. And I guess, sometimes it's about highlighting situations more globally, that kind of ripple, and sort of making people aware of situations through the network. And sometimes it's just really, really localized support. Sometimes it's signposting individuals at risk to other organizations. Sometimes it's about helping to create a space. So it really varies. So, that list of countries that we kind of work with, it varies how we work in those places and at different times as well. And like I said at the beginning, where we work has been very organic. So sort of starting out, I guess, with some of the research points of James's work and some of the music points of where I was working, and then kind of the connections have kind of, moved around those areas primarily. So that's kind of just very organically, without us getting a map out and saying, this is where we think we need to work. And that's, again, about the strength of the network and us listening to kind of what people want as well.
I'll just add one thing. Artists in those contexts are extremely knowledgeable about their own context. They don't stop creating work. And what we noticed in the early days of In Place of War is that they might create something where myself as an outsider thinks one thing is happening, and of course something else is happening. And so, I mean, in Eastern Sri Lanka, they went at a time of a very nasty sort of civil conflict where people were being assassinated and killed, and they created performances largely from Hindu epics, largely about issues of war and conflict in those Hindu epics, but would never admit that they were doing performances about war. They were just doing the Hindu epics. So they were communicating through their art practices about some of the dilemmas that were happening in a highly contested situation. And they, in that context, knew the levels of safety, what they could and couldn't say. But they were still making art, but in a very clever, underhand way.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And that is happening in
Yeah.
the two regions I mentioned. I just wondered if you were able to, or do you feel it's better?
I think in the early days, the work was documenting some of that work, promoting some of that work, supporting it through making networks, but never being so bold as to claim that we knew what was going on. And sometimes we didn't, in the early days, some projects we didn't report on. We've written books about this, and then there's chapters missing for the very important reason that it's not appropriate to promote work that is not good to promote for very good reasons.
Thank you. Any more?
Hello, thank you so much, and I really enjoyed this panel. I just have a question around, given the sort of correlation between war zones and disability, whether you work with any disabled artists or organisations.
Yeah, so we did this amazing piece of work, which was actually a collaboration with partners at the university. So we worked with an amazing academic called Mahesh, who's in medicine, and a guy called Johnny, who's in geography. And this project was all about working with people who faced disability due to the conflict in the north of Uganda. And it was about people who had experienced limb loss, major limb loss, through road accidents or through landmines. And so a lot of people who were, had been through that civil conflict had lost their limbs. And because of the loss of limbs and the nature of the north of Uganda, you have this kind of like one road from like Kampala right up to Gulu. And then you have millions of people living outside of that road. But there's no maps. There's no maps that show you where any of the communities are. So part of Johnny, the geographer's work, was to map these communities and then to find out where people who had disabilities were located. So they could mobilise clinics to go in and to help people with prosthetic limbs. But a big part of being disabled in Uganda, the stigma of disability. So I went actually out there and did some focus groups. So the stigma of disability meant that a lot of people were completely outcast from society, from their own families. People could not work. And this situation where people were very isolated, both mobilised, in a mobilised sense and also in a kind of social sense, was a really, really critical situation. So In Place of War brought theatre. And we worked with a theatre form called Forum Theatre and worked with communities. So we established a theatre group in the north of Uganda, which went into some of the remote communities and essentially helped people kind of understand what it is to be a person with a disability and the stigma that goes with that. And actually, now looking back, this was a few years ago, the results of that it's had a huge impact on kind of how people with disabilities are treated within those communities. And there's a lot of amazing case studies of people with disabilities, getting jobs and being welcomed back into their families. So it's a really powerful project. And I think that's one of the things, just to add to the setting that we're in, the university, and what I think, I'm really big fan of academia. I've never went to university, but I've loved working with James, working in this amazing institution. And I think the collaborative nature of academia, I think that's where the power is held, where you bring together medicine and arts and geography you know, and these incredible opportunities, these great collaborations can result in really interesting impact around the world. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to add, we've got an exhibition in Place of War in the Student Union from today until Thursday, so if anyone wants to find out more.
Thank you. I think it's truly inspiring what you're all doing and what the result is in terms of the response in very, very difficult contexts. And in particular, maybe it's a question for you, Salam, or maybe not yet, is how inspiring young people are and how much we have to have that belief that young people, genuinely young people, really do have a voice and have much to say in response to the context in which they're in. And I just wonder, I mean, this is me as an ex-teacher here in this country. I just wonder, do you have any kind of program that goes into schools to say, this is who we are, this is what we're about, these are the opportunities that you may want to try to engage in, and not in a kind of, not in a paternalistic kind of way, but saying, here's an opportunity. And do you involve schools in any sense, or is it just more often, like you were saying, Ruth, more of an organic connection, link, network opportunities?
We don't work at school, you know, like primary school age. So we work with kind of generally young people over the age of 18, because we see them as young people with an ability to be able to action change. So we sort of work at that point. But generally with young people from lots of different contexts, you know, across, it's certainly if we're talking about the UK, and we've started to do some work in the US, in Detroit. And it's really, I think, the programme that Salam was part of, I think for me, the reason that, so I started it in Place of War when I was a young person, and then I realised I'm not anymore, which is tragic and horrible, and the horror. But what I realised when we did the 100 Agents of Change project, the people who created work and projects, so we gave seed funding and mentoring, we had like a museum of school exclusion. We had a billboard campaign promoting kind of Roma communities in the UK. There were all of these incredible projects that I just thought, even though I think in my heart I'm young, I could never have thought of these brilliant and amazing projects that are so relevant to young people. So for us, you know, we further that work now. We've got a really big project called 100 Creative Agents of Climate Change, working with young people in climate action across the UK. And I think the real value in working with young people at the age group we do is that, like Salam said, she was able to design what the programme looked like. We give the tools and the power to the young people, but also for them to connect with the young people at Magamba in Zimbabwe, and to connect with the young people in the organisations we work with in Brazil, and etc., to create their own networks of support and to kind of learn from the innovation in the ways people work in different contexts. I just think that's so powerful. That's shaped me, the opportunity to work with James. I just want to say a big thank you to James. He's just like changed my life. But the opportunity to work with James and to be in the Congo and to be, you know, 24 and to be like, oh my gosh, okay, wow, this is amazing. And to learn everything that I know, I've learned from either James or being out in the world. And I wanted to share, so in the pandemic, we got to a point where we were like, you know, we want to share this with other young people and have, you know, the opportunity for them to have the journeys that we've had as individuals in the organisation. So that's how we created these programmes, to do just that.
Salam, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Give me lots of food for thought now. Maybe as my role, chair of Youth Advisory Board, maybe I'll get into schools, maybe, yeah. But I'm thinking, for sure, going forward, there's like importance in the diversity, right? The ideas that could come from young people. So 100%, there should be ways that we can maybe reach people in schools without physically going into schools. But that's something, yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Giving us food for thought. Were there any more? A lady here.
Hi, just following on from that, I'm interested to know what the next 20 years, kind of what your ambitions would be, and Salam, from your perspective on the Youth Advisory Board, where would young people like to see impact from an organisation like this?
I was not ready for that question. No pressure. It's very fresh. I guess for now, I'm in I've got my day job as a charity, and then I produce events where, for me, the most important thing is platforming young people to do what it is that they do. So in my case, it's Ethiopian culture. We want to dispel negative narratives. And the only way to do that is, I guess, by giving the young people, the stage to perform whatever it is that they want to do, giving them the onus to decide. Yeah, sorry, I don't know how it starts that. Huh? Yeah,
I think it's a great question. We are here celebrating 20 years of this amazing charity. It would be great to hear from each of you, if it's not too much putting you on the spot, about what you want, hopefully for the next 20 years, or just the vision beyond even today, what your hopes are for this brilliant organisation. James?
I'm on the board. It's just, I love the fact that I can just watch the organic growth of In Place of War into directions that are unexpected but also urgent. It's interesting. My route is I now work on projects around care and the arts, but it's completely linked to my interest in war. So I've gone the next 20 years into care because I saw so many people hurt each other in war zones. You know, I saw the impacts of violence, bodily violence on people's lives, and I became interested in what it might mean for people to care for each other. So I've gone in that direction, and I just I'm indebted to Ruth. The idea that the idea it's that way around is just nonsense. And I'm just really excited to see the growth of this incredible organisation over the next 20 years. It will go where it goes, where the urgent need takes it.
And for you?
My husband always says to me, In Place of War starts on a Monday being one thing, and by Friday it's something completely different. And he's completely right. And I think it's that thing where we're just, we're a small team. We will always be a small team. And we work really hard. And I just want to say a big thank you to, where is she, Roz? Roz, we've got people like Roz in our team just working tirelessly to make amazing things happen. And I think, who knows? And also, who knows where the world will be in 20 years? And I think we started off with In Place of War saying, I hope there's a time when we don't exist. We shouldn't exist, of course, because we were thinking about being, working in conflicts. And of course, we're not an organisation that wants to see peace in the world. But I actually feel like we're a network of people who are all fighting a good fight, whatever that fight looks like in different contexts. And so the organisation maybe doesn't exist, but the people within it, I hope, go from strength to strength and continue to support each other across geographies, across contexts. That's what I'd like to see. It's a powerful, powerful network, and I'm so honoured to be part of it.
As a change maker?
She just took the words out of my mouth. It was literally like, in the next 20 years, looking at bringing about as much change to the point of being irrelevant in terms of like, there's no need for you to be an activist anymore. Just be a good human being and just enjoy life. So just change to the point of irrelevance.
Got a mariachi band now.
Oh, exactly.
I thought they were cutting us off. I thought there was music to make us stop talking, like we'd ran over time.
Salam. For you?
I echo everything that Ruth and Tongai said. Can I do a cheeky plug?
Why not?
Okay. Are you all from Manchester, I'm guessing? I'm hoping. On the 22nd of the music. On the 22nd of June, we'll be performing at home in Manchester. No Direction Home, stand-up comedy collective of migrant and refugee background. So there, maybe you'll see more of what the future looks like.
Thank you. And Ed, can we have you as an ambassador for the next 20 years? Is that okay?
I'd like to learn mariachi. Seriously. You might think I've got a little vihuela, which is part of a little stringed instrument. I'd just like to stay alive and be able to witness and be a part of this beautiful organisation and see where it goes.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our fantastic panel, James, Ruth, Tongai, Salam and Ed. Thank you.
Really?